The frozen survivor. The winds of Glacialis 7 howled like dying spirits across the barren ice fields, carrying with them the bitter promise of death to any soul foolish enough to venture unprepared into their embrace. The research station designated Outpost Meridian had been abandoned for 3 standard years, its skeletal framework now home only to frost and shadows. Ice crystals formed geometric patterns across every surface, turning the once bustling facility into a crystalline tomb. Commander Marcus Reed pulled his thermal suit tighter as he made his routine patrol through the station's outer perimeter. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, despite the suit's heating system working at full capacity. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the occasional crack of settling ice or the distant moan of wind through broken ventilation shafts. This was his punishment detail, though he'd long stopped thinking of it that way. After refusing to follow orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties on Kepler 442b, the military had stationed him here as a communications specialist, monitoring deep space transmissions that rarely came. Marcus had grown accustomed to the solitude. The endless white landscape held a strange beauty that spoke to something deep within him, but today felt different. His instruments had detected an energy signature 3 days ago, something that had crashed in the northern quadrant. Probably debris from a passing freighter, he'd reasoned, but protocol demanded investigation. The northern sector stretched before him like an ocean of white death. His snowcat's treads left deep grooves in the pristine surface as he navigated between towering ice formations that resembled ancient cathedrals. The temperature reading on his display showed minus 47 degrees Celsius, warm by Glacialis 7 standards. His destination was still 2 kilometers away when he saw the smoke. It wasn't the black plume of burning fuel he'd expected, but rather thin wisps of white vapor rising from what appeared to be a small crater. As he drew closer, the snowcat's sensors began picking up trace amounts of exotic matter, elements not native to this system. His pulse quickened. This wasn't debris from a human vessel. The crash site told a story of desperation and violence. Scattered across the ice were fragments of what had once been an escape pod, its alien construction obvious even to Marcus's untrained eye. The metal was a strange blue-gray alloy that seemed to shimmer even in the pale light of Glacialis 7's distant sun. Scorch marks radiated outward from the impact point, and he could see where someone had dragged themselves away from the wreckage. Following the trail was easy at first. Drops of something that might have been blood created a dark path across the white surface. But as he moved further from the crash site, the trail became fainter, covered by the ever-present snowfall. Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Someone might still be alive out here. The trail led him to a depression in the ice, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a formation of crystalline rocks. There, huddled against the natural windbreak, he found her. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin held a pale blue tint that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, and her hair was the color of starlight, a silver white that caught and reflected every photon. She wore the tattered remains of what might have been a flight suit, now little more than scraps of fabric providing minimal protection against the deadly cold. Her breathing was so shallow that at first Marcus thought she might already be dead. As he approached, she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal eyes the color of deep ocean. When she saw him, fear flashed across her features, and she tried to scramble backward, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "Easy," Marcus said softly, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you." The alien woman stared at him with those incredible eyes, and he could see intelligence there, along with pain and exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She spoke then, her voice barely a whisper, in a language that sounded like wind chimes, in a gentle breeze. When he didn't respond, she tried again in broken standard. "Please," she managed, the word coming out as a painful rasp. No more chains. The simple plea hit Marcus like a physical blow. Chains. Someone had held this being in chains. The scorch marks on her wrists and ankles, which he had initially attributed to the crash, took on a different meaning. These were restraint burns. Without hesitation, Marcus shrugged off his thermal cloak and wrapped it around her trembling form. She was lighter than he expected, her bones feeling fragile as bird wings beneath his hands. Her skin was cold as the ice around them, but he could feel a faint pulse at her throat. "My name is Marcus," he said as he lifted her carefully. "I'm going to get you somewhere warm." She looked up at him with those ocean eyes, and for a moment, the fear receded. "Zara," she whispered, and then her consciousness fled. The journey back to the station seemed to take forever. Marcus drove with one hand while keeping the other on Zara's still form, checking for signs of life. Her breathing remained shallow but steady, and gradually, some warmth began to return to her skin. The thermal cloak was designed to retain body, heat, and slowly, very slowly, it was working. Outpost Meridian's medical bay was basic, but functional. Marcus had trained in field medicine during his military service, and though he'd never treated an alien before, the basics seemed similar enough. He placed Zara on the medical table and began running diagnostics. Her body temperature was dangerously low, her blood pressure barely registering, but she was alive. As the warming units began their work, Marcus found himself studying her features more closely. Despite the obvious differences in species, there was something hauntingly familiar about her face. The bone structure was more delicate than human, the ears slightly pointed, but the expressions that flickered across her unconscious features were unmistakably emotional. Pain, fear, and something else. Relief, perhaps. It was then that he noticed the scars, not just the restraint burns, but older marks that spoke of systematic abuse. Someone had hurt this being repeatedly, deliberately. The rage that filled Marcus was cold and focused, the same anger that had gotten him sent to this frozen exile. But this time, he welcomed it. Hours passed as he worked to stabilize her condition. The station's computer provided what information it could about treating hypothermia in unknown species, but mostly Marcus relied on instinct and careful observation. When her breathing finally deepened and some color returned to her blue-tinted skin, he allowed himself a moment of relief. Zara stirred as the third day dawned, her eyes opening slowly as consciousness returned. She found herself in a warm room, filled with unfamiliar equipment, covered by soft blankets that smelled of human habitation. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her as memories of captivity flooded back. But then she saw him. Marcus sat in a chair beside the medical table, his head tilted back in exhausted sleep. His face was kind, she realized, marked by lines that spoke of laughter as well as sorrow. This was not the face of her captors. When he stirred at her movement, those eyes that had been the last thing she remembered before unconsciousness took her opened to regard her with obvious relief. "Welcome back," he said softly, making no sudden movements that might frighten her. "How are you feeling?" Zara considered the question seriously. Her body ached, but it was the clean ache of healing rather than the sharp pain of injury. The terrible cold that had been killing her cell by cell was gone, replaced by blessed warmth. But more than that, for the first time in longer than she cared to remember, she felt safe. "Better," she managed, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life." Marcus shook his head. "You saved your own life by surviving long enough for me to find you. That escape pod crash should have killed you instantly." A shadow passed over Zara's features. "Sometimes I think it would have been kinder if it had." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Marcus was only beginning to understand. But he saw something in her eyes then, a spark of determination that the cold and whatever had come before it hadn't been able to extinguish. This being had survived against impossible odds, and she wasn't done fighting yet. As Zara slowly sat up, testing her strength, she looked around the medical bay with curious eyes. Everything was functional, practical, designed for efficiency, rather than comfort. It reminded her of the ships she had known before her captivity, when she had been free to explore the stars. "This place," she said. "You live here alone?" Marcus nodded. "For 3 years now. It's not much, but it's home." Something in his tone suggested that, like her, he was here not entirely by choice, but unlike her, he had made peace with his circumstances. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet acceptance that spoke of inner strength. Outside the medical bay windows, the endless ice fields of Glacialis 7 stretched toward the horizon, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Somewhere out there was the wreckage of her escape pod, and beyond that, the vast network of space lanes where her former captors might even now be searching for their lost property. But for now, in this warm room with this kind stranger who had asked for nothing in return for saving her life, Zara allowed herself to hope that perhaps her long nightmare was finally over. Beyond the ice. The first thing Zara noticed when she woke the next morning was the smell of something that might have been food. Real food, not the nutrient paste her captors had fed her during the endless months of imprisonment. She sat up slowly, her body still protesting the movement, but no longer screaming in agony from the cold. Through the small window beside her bed, she could see the alien landscape of Glacialis 7 bathed in the pale light of its distant star. Marcus appeared in the doorway carrying a steaming bowl, and she was struck again by how careful his movements were around her. He never approached too quickly, never made sudden gestures that might trigger the reflexes born of too many beatings. Somehow, without her telling him anything about what she had endured, he understood. "I'm not sure what your species eats," he said, setting the bowl on a small table within her reach. "But this is a protein synthesis from our emergency supplies. It should be nutritionally complete." Zara accepted the bowl gratefully, inhaling the warm steam that rose from its contents. The first spoonful was like a revelation. It had actual flavor, subtle but pleasant, and her body seemed to recognize it as nourishment rather than mere sustenance. As she ate, she became aware that Marcus was watching her with obvious relief. "How long was I unconscious?" she asked between careful bites. 3 days total. Your body temperature was so low that I wasn't sure you'd ever wake up." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm glad you proved me wrong." The simple statement carried more weight than a dozen elaborate speeches might have. This human had spent 3 days caring for a complete stranger, an alien whose very presence on his world might bring him trouble, and he was glad she had survived. When had anyone last been glad that she existed? As her strength returned over the following hours, Zara found herself able to move around the station's small living quarters. Marcus had given her clothing from his own supplies, garments designed for a larger frame but wonderfully warm. She discovered that he had been living here alone for years, maintaining equipment that monitored deep space communications and weather patterns for some distant authority. "Why are you here?" she asked as they shared another meal. "This seems like a lonely assignment for someone who chose it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the ice fields beyond the window. "I didn't choose it," he said finally. "I was ordered here after I refused to follow commands that would have resulted in civilian casualties. The military tends to send troublemakers to places where they can't cause any more trouble." "And yet you saved me," Zara observed. "Another civilian who might cause you trouble." He looked at her then, his eyes holding a warmth that seemed to chase away the cold of this frozen world. Some things are more important than following orders. It was then that Zara began to tell him her story. The words came slowly at first, painful to speak after so long held silent. She had been a navigator aboard a merchant vessel, part of a small fleet that traded between the outer colonies. Her species, the Etherians, possessed an innate ability to sense gravitational currents in space, making them valuable as pilots in the dangerous regions between star systems. That ability had also made them valuable as slaves. The Kronos Syndicate had attacked her fleet without warning, killing those who resisted and taking the rest as cargo. Etherian navigators commanded high prices in the illegal markets, she explained, their skills ensuring safe passage through the cosmic storms that plagued the outer rim. She had spent 2 years in captivity, forced to guide smuggling ships through routes that would have been impossible for ordinary pilots to navigate. "I escaped during a transfer," she said, her voice growing distant as she remembered. "The ship was attacked by another syndicate, and in the confusion, I managed to reach an escape pod. I programmed it for the nearest uninhabited system and launched, hoping to find somewhere to hide until I could figure out what to do next. And instead you found me," Marcus said softly. "Instead, I found someone who chose to help rather than profit," she corrected. "Do you understand how rare that is in the galaxy?" Before Marcus could answer, the station's communication array began broadcasting an urgent signal. Both of them froze as the sound filled the small living space. Marcus moved quickly to the console, his fingers dancing over the controls as he tried to isolate the transmission. "It's a general broadcast," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Kronos Syndicate frequency." Zara felt the blood drain from her face as she heard the familiar modulation pattern. "They're looking for me." The message was brief but chilling. A substantial reward was being offered for information leading to the recovery of stolen Kronos property, specifically an Etherian female who had escaped during a recent incident. The description was unmistakably Zara, down to the distinctive silver-white hair of her bloodline. "How long before they get here?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would not be what she wanted to hear. Marcus was running calculations on his display. "If they're doing a systematic search of this sector, maybe 6 hours, maybe less if they've already narrowed down the possible landing sites." 6 hours. After everything she had endured, after finally finding someone who treated her like a person rather than property, she had 6 hours before it all came crashing down again. Zara felt despair threatening to overwhelm her, but then she looked at Marcus and saw something unexpected in his expression: determination. "We need to get you off this planet," he said matter-of-factly. "We?" Zara stared at him. "Marcus, if they find you've helped me, they'll kill you. Or worse, they'll sell you to someone who will make you wish they had killed you." "Then we'd better make sure they don't find us," he replied with a slight smile that didn't quite hide the steel beneath it. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Marcus revealed that the station possessed more resources than she had initially realized. Hidden beneath the main structure was a small but functional spacecraft, ostensibly for emergency evacuations, but clearly modified far beyond its original specifications. As they worked together to prepare it for launch, Zara began to understand that her rescuer was more than just a disgraced soldier sent to a frozen exile. "You've been planning this for a while," she observed, as she watched him bypass several security protocols with practiced ease. "Let's just say I've always known this. Assignment wouldn't be permanent," Marcus replied. "I've been preparing for the day when staying here would become more dangerous than leaving." They loaded the ship with supplies and what little personal possessions Marcus deemed worth saving. As they worked, Zara found herself studying this human who had turned her world upside down in the span of a few days. He moved with quiet efficiency, making decisions quickly but carefully, always thinking several steps ahead. More importantly, he never once suggested that helping her wasn't worth the risk. The ship's engines came online with a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in Zara's bones. Through the small viewport, she could see the ice fields where she had nearly died, now looking almost peaceful in the pale starlight. Soon they would be just another memory, another chapter in the story of survival that had become her life. "Where will we go?" she asked, as Marcus ran through the final pre-flight checks. "I know people," he said simply. "Good people who don't ask too many questions and don't much care what the Chronos Syndicate wants. We'll find you somewhere safe." As the ship lifted off from the hidden launch bay, Zara watched Outpost Meridian shrink below them until it was just another speck on the endless white surface. She thought about the person she had been before her captivity, full of dreams and plans for the future. That person felt like a stranger now, someone she barely remembered. But sitting here beside Marcus as they climbed toward the stars, she began to think that perhaps it was time to discover who she might become. The stars beyond Glacialis 7 stretched endlessly in all directions, each one representing possibilities she had thought lost forever. And for the first time since her escape, Zara allowed herself to believe that some of those possibilities might actually be within her reach. "Thank you," she said quietly as the planet fell away behind them. Marcus glanced at her, his expression gentle but serious. "Thank me when we're safely away from here. Right now, we're just getting started." But even as he spoke, Zara could see something in his eyes that matched the feeling growing in her own chest. Hope. Real, honest hope for whatever lay ahead. The cold of Glacialis 7 was behind them now, and the warmth between them was something that no syndicate could steal or sell. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somehow, that made all the difference in the universe. As their ship disappeared into the cosmic dark, the ice fields of Glacialis 7 settled back into their eternal silence, keeping the secret of two souls who had found each other in the coldest place in the galaxy, and discovered that sometimes the best way to escape the past is to build a future with someone who understands that survival is just the beginning of the story. The stars welcomed them home. The end.